Eagles Entertainment.
With the 12th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Fran Duffy. We've got a loaded show today. It all starts with Pick 6, where we talk with Greg Cosell about some of the wide receivers that are flying under the radar a little bit. We talked about some of the big names already, the Jamar Chases and the Devontae Smiths, the Jalen Waddles. We've talked about those guys with Greg already. Talked about a couple sleepers here and there, but let's talk about some guys in that second tier, that third tier, players that you need to know that are going to go off the board in day 2 or maybe early day 3 in this draft later this month. So we're going to talk about all of that in Pick 6 with Greg Cosell at the top of the show. After that, we're going to transition to Draft Buzz, where Ben Fennell and I are going to go through another mock draft. This one, 2 rounds from CBS Sports analyst Ryan Wilson. Good stuff there. We'll go through both of the players that he's got mocked to the Eagles, as well as some picks that really stood out to us in both rounds of the mock draft. After that, we've got Unofficial Visit, where I catch up with UCLA defensive lineman Osa Odighizuwa. We talk about his Senior Bowl process, what it's been like getting ready for the draft, his career out there with the Bruins. We'll talk all about that in that segment, our Unofficial Visit. Then we wrap things up with our draft mailbag, where I take a question from you at home about pro days and also a mock draft of the top 15 picks in this draft. Before we get things going, I wanted to remind you once again about jumping onto our Apple Podcast page, leaving us a rating, leaving us a comment. That's the best way to get your voice heard here on the show. And not only that, but it also helps just promote the show a little bit, makes it more visible to people looking for podcasts about the NFL draft. So head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. The draft is getting closer and closer. If you've got a question, now is the time. Jump on in and we'll make sure we get it answered before draft weekend. Also, before we get rolling, I wanted to also remind you guys that I did a film breakdown about 25 minutes long with Eagles head coach Nick Sirianni. If you are into the X's and O's of the game, which if you listen to this podcast, chances are you do, make sure you go check that one out. I posted the link over on my Twitter feed at EaglesXOs. You can go find it on the Eagles Facebook page, the Eagles YouTube page, of course on PhiladelphiaEagles.com and the Eagles mobile app. Outstanding analysis and insight from Coach Sirianni. So if you want to learn more about wide receiver play, some pass game concepts, really dive into a lot, his coaching philosophy, the importance of yards after catch, we hit on a ton. So make sure you go check that out. Again, you can go find the link over on my Twitter feed at EaglesXOs. All right, let's get this episode rolling. I'm excited to get things started here with Pick 6 and Greg Cosell.
Now it's time for Pick 6.
All right, we're excited to keep things going here as we talk with our friend Greg Cosell as we start things off here in Pick 6, talking more about wide receivers. And Greg, we've talked about some of the top names. We've talked about some sleepers as well, guys like Jalen Darden. We talked about a couple of weeks ago. If you haven't already, make sure you go check that one out. But we wanted to talk about maybe the guys at the next tier at receiver that we were excited about and guys that you've liked on film.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, tiers, I'm never good at that, as you know, Fran. But these are just guys, that I really liked these guys watching them. I have no idea where they'll get drafted. You know as well as I do that receivers are, along with corners, normally more of players from those 2 positions get drafted every year than any other 2 positions. So, receivers get drafted. There'll be 30 to 35 receivers, if not more, drafted in this draft.
So one of those names that you talk about is just like, where is he going to go? Is Terrace Marshall, because some people will say, he could be in the back end of round 1. Maybe he's somewhere in the middle of day 2, sometimes round 3. Yeah, it's interesting to see there's just the scope of a player like this. But Terrace Marshall began the year in 2019 as one of Joe Burrow's top receiving threats, gets hurt, and that's where Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase kind of took a stranglehold of all the targets. So by the time he got back, was just never really kind of mixed in as a top target down the stretch run for them, but came back this year, semi-productive, then ended up opting out mid-season. So interested to see what you've seen on film and talk about the traits that you saw from Terrace Marshall at LSU.
Yeah, I watched him last summer, and then, of course, I watched him this year. So I really liked him when I first saw him last summer. He's long, he's fluid. He's one of those guys that makes it look easy, Fran. I mean, he's just an easy strider, but yet there's some sudden explosive movement traits to him. I think he's a vertical dimension. He's really good run after catch. That's where that stride length really comes into play. I mean, you saw him catch some short passes, whether they were slants, glance routes, and all of a sudden he just separates and it looks like there's no effort. I think he's got the size and the skill set to be a factor at all 3 levels of the defense. He can line up in multiple locations. we all like to talk about, is he a number one? Is he a number two? That's the way people kind of talk about receivers. I mean, I think he can become a volume number one receiver. I think it would take some time. I don't think he steps into the NFL as that guy, but I think depending on situation, I think he could become that guy down the road.
You and I have had a lot of conversations over the years, both in this podcast and the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, and just off camera, whether it's been on the phone or in person, talking about big receivers and what separates guys that, make it with that profile versus guys that don't make it. When you look at Terrace Marshall, what is it that separates him from some other big receivers? Because you've done a lot of receivers. There are a lot more big body targets in this draft. Is it the movement skills, that ability to kind of glide and separate from guys? What is it that separates him from some of the other bigger targets in this class?
Well, I'd say a couple things. Number one, you got to catch the ball, and I'm not being sarcastic.
Yeah,
I
sure.
think he showed a wide catching radius with the easy ability to catch the ball away from his frame, and I think that's really important. I also thought that he did, and again, you got to watch a lot of tape for this, but I thought that there were examples, fairly meaningful examples, of showing refined route running, how to set up corners with his vertical stem and his head movement. And that's something I really look for with receivers. I thought he had a sense of pace and tempo as a route runner based on the route. I thought that there were times, when he was patient with a feel for the specific route, because running routes is not just flying off the line of scrimmage, unless, of course, you're just running a vertical route. And I like the way he worked the middle of the field. He's a big kid, obviously not 220. So it's not like he's got mass to him, but I think he worked the middle of the field effectively, both at the short and intermediate levels. I think there's a lot to like about his game, and you would have to believe that with NFL coaching and more experience, that he'll even refine those areas even more.
Yeah, so some people really like Terrace Marshall, and obviously made a lot of plays down in the SEC, which takes us now to our second player. And this is also a guy who made a lot of plays in the SEC. That's Josh Palmer from Tennessee. Now, 6'1", 210 pounds, great wingspan. He's got great length. Now, this guy is a 4-year starter. He started 36 games over his career, but 36 starts, less than 100 catches. So not a ton of production. But the traits have been pretty good. Now, I'll interested to get your thoughts, what you saw from him on film.
Yeah, the production's the result of the fact that they never really got the quarterback situation at Tennessee settled. Even though the one kid was a big-time recruit from New Jersey.
Yeah, Guarantano,
Guarantano, yeah. But this kid also, the other thing about Palmer, he was a big-time recruit. He came out of a powerhouse high school, St. Thomas Aquinas in South Florida. So this is not just some kid who, happened to, end up at the Senior Bowl and, hey, let's talk about him. I thought, based on his tape, that he was one of the more intriguing guys. We know he's not going to be a top 20 pick. He's a big kid. He's not a burner. His 40 time wasn't tremendous. He did run by Patrick Surtain a couple of times, though, if you watch the Alabama.
Bring that up. Yep. I was going to bring that up. Hey, you and I both really love Patrick Surtain at Alabama. And the one guy that kind of beat him over the top was Palmer. And it was, it was a beautiful ball outside the numbers. It was a great ball, but you saw him get on top of Patrick Surtain. Yeah,
no question. So you're talking about a solidly built receiver. He's got a strong body, knows how to use it. He's a powerful looking kid. He's physical. He's competitive. I thought he shielded corners well and attacked the ball in the air. I thought, you talk about this a lot, and I think this is important in the NFL. We talk about it on both sides of the ball, and I know it's something you focus on. I thought he played through contact as a route runner really well without route disruption.
Yep.
He's got a naturally strong body with his hands and his arms. He was competitive run after catch. He fought for yards. To use the old Walter Payton thing, he did not go down easy. I think he has a lot of traits that you kind of like. He's got size, hands, body control, physicality, competitiveness. He's got an NFL body, and he plays to that body. I was really intrigued by this kid. It would not surprise me. And again, without getting into where guys get drafted, I think this kid could get drafted a little higher than people might think.
Yeah, now he never had more than 34 catches in a year, but for a lot of different reasons, as you mentioned, goes to the Senior Bowl, and I thought he looked pretty good. He's a springy kid for his size, for his frame. I wrote down Josh Reynolds, who's become a solid starter in the NFL. Obviously, now he's got an opportunity in Tennessee to be even more than that. But
I think Palmer's body is firmer, and I think he plays stronger.
I think that's fair. Yep, that's a good point. Palmer, an intriguing player. And like I said, had a good week down in Mobile. Let's now move to another player here that is really intriguing in terms of his height, weight, speed profile. And that's Simi Fehoko, complete opposite end of the country out in Stanford. This is a redshirt sophomore who declared for the draft in Fehoko. Really good looking kid, 6'4", 222 pounds, runs in the low 4.4s at his pro day. What did you see on film from Fehoko and how you feel like he can make that jump to the NFL?
I watched a good amount of him because I really studied Davis Mills hard. And so I was really looking for Fehoko as well. And he's another really intriguing kid with that size speed profile. I mean, I wouldn't call him an explosive burner, but I think there's a legitimate comparison to be made to someone like Chase Claypool coming out of Notre Dame. And obviously Claypool was he a second round pick?
He was a second round pick. Greg, I wrote down Brashad Perriman as well.
Oh, you know what? That's a good comparison as well.
He was a first end of the first round.
Yeah. I mean, size, play speed, if you feature slants, in-breakers, schemed verticals, this kid, fits that. I don't think he's a volume receiver, certainly not to start his NFL career, but he showed physicality on his release versus press and through his route stem. He made tough contested catches. Can he be a true vertical dimension? I think the answer to that is yes. Is he going to just run by people? Probably not, but with that size, the stride, he's a big kid. I thought he was effective versus press. I thought he got off the line of scrimmage well. I think he's a really interesting guy.
I think he's fun to watch. I mean, he averaged just under 19 yards a catch, only 62 career grabs and 5 starts. So those 5 starts would be less than any receiver drafted in the last decade. But again, small sample size as a redshirt.
Only 6 games this year they played?
Yeah, exactly. And he only started a handful of them. So I think that when you look at Fehoko, you're projecting that his best football and most productive football is ahead of him, but the traits are there. I mean, you could see him track the ball over the shoulder. You could see him after the catch win in a lot of different ways. I mean, he's got that juice to accelerate and pull away. He's powerful. He'll drop the hammer on defenders when he's got the ball in his hand. So he's a really intriguing player for sure.
And in today's NFL, you throw the screen out to him with his size, his build-up speed and velocity. He's straight line explosive. I mean, he can be used in multiple ways in today's NFL offenses. I
mean, even like you talked about Claypool. I mean, the Eagles got to see Claypool up close when they're handing him jet sweeps. I feel like Fehoko could be that kind of guy in the NFL. Like you're trying to get him the ball fast.
Without question.
All right, well, let's get to the next one here. We've got 3 Senior Bowlers to take us on. We already talked about Josh Palmer. Let's go down to Clemson and talk about Cornell Powell, who kind of like Fehoko, very limited sample size here. Only started this past year, and they lose T. Higgins. Justin Ross, who's going to be a top pick next year. He was out for the season with injury. They had some of their other young studs that were in and out of the lineup. But then you look at Powell, and he took a full advantage of his opportunity. And what did you see from him on film?
You know what? I came away, and then I'll go into a little more detail, just feeling like, this kid looks like a professional receiver.
Yep.
Not explosive, not going to run by people. You don't go, oh my God. You don't finish watching his tape and go, wow, this guy's special. But, he's got a sturdy frame. He's physical. He's competitive. His hands, his body control stood out. He snatched the ball out of the air, no matter the position of his body, made a lot of contested catches in one-on-one situations. As I said, while he didn't show purely explosive vertical traits, there were times he did get on top of college corners with his route running. And I thought as a route runner, he was really good. I mean, I hate to use the word sudden because I don't think that's the right word, but I thought that at the top of his route stem, he just had terrific separation quickness. Didn't he score that touchdown against Ohio State? He made Sean Wade.
He carved up Sean Wade. Yeah,
he just made, and with nuanced, subtle route running. It wasn't just he's a better athlete or anything like that. I mean, he ran some really good routes, and I think he's the kind of kid that could get better at the next level. Just with more experience.
He didn't test like a bad athlete either. He went to the pro day and tested pretty well.
Yeah.
The Senior Bowl I thought was a good. So he's just stacking it up because the film's good. Pro day workout was pretty good. The Senior Bowl was good. He's a good kid off the field. He gets rave reviews there. He checks a lot of boxes, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, I watched him quite a while ago because obviously I did Clemson early on because I did Lawrence
first,
Rogers, and so I did Powell early on, and obviously I knew who he was, just watching college football. But I just came away from watching his tape thinking, you know what, this guy's a professional receiver.
Yeah.
I can't sit here and say what his volume targets are going to be, for fantasy people or anything like that. But he just had the look of a professional NFL wideout.
There's been a lot written, from the fantasy community and stuff like that about breakout age and, don't trust senior receivers coming out of the draft that only, didn't do anything until their senior year. I just look at Powell and say that, there's something to be said for a guy that, more talented players come in and when you go to Clemson, you're going to get talented kids come in every single year. And they were ahead of him on the depth chart, but he didn't transfer. He didn't pout. He just put his head down, kept working, got better. And when his opportunity came, he made the most of it. And I think there's something said for that.
Because they get receivers. I mean, They got the kid Ross, who unfortunately has the injury.
The back issue.
And who was the freshman this year, I think, from South Florida.
They've got two kids. They got two freshmen this year. They're going to be top picks. And they had Joseph Nada and Frank Ladson a year ago.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. The second guy you mentioned.
Ladson.
Yep. Yeah, big time recruit. I think he's a South Florida kid too, by the way.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong, but no, they get receivers, and you're right. The fact that he just stayed there and played and waited and had a really good season this year, and I like this kid.
And we might poo-poo that and say, oh, it's not a big deal. I promise you that there are coaches, scouts, decision makers that value that part of this profile for sure. Let's go now to a similar kind of player, Greg, with Des Fitzpatrick from Louisville, 6'2", 202 pounds. Now, like Josh Palmer, Fitzpatrick, extremely experienced. He's got 42 career starts. He started from day one on campus at Louisville, had a great year with Lamar Jackson, a career high in catches in 2017. So 45 grabs, just under 700 yards, 9 touchdowns as a freshman. And so really kind of put himself on the map. And as the quarterback situation changed, so too did his production. But Fitzpatrick is a really, really fun player to watch. And I think he's got an NFL skill set. I'm interested to get your thoughts on what you like most from his tape.
All right. I'm throwing this out there, Fran. All right.
Okay.
Because, you know how this goes. And this is all people. After I say this,
you're about to say a hot take.
Another word I say.
Yeah, you got a hot take. All right, here we go.
I got a hot take.
All right.
You know who he reminded me of? Coming out of college. Remember, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I'm not talking about where this player is now. I'm talking about this player coming out of college. That's who Fitzpatrick reminded me of. You ready?
All right. Can I say that he catches passes at Lambeau Field?
Yes.
There you go. All right.
Reminded me of Devontae Adams coming out of college.
What is it that stands out in that way?
Size, stride length, build-up speed. Neither one was a burner. I remember watching Devontae Adams. He was not a burner. Hands, body control, competitiveness. I think that profile very much reminded me of Devontae Adams. And I watched Fitzpatrick last summer in 2019 and this year, and I liked him the same both times. He was one of my favorite guys to watch. I just think he's another one of those guys that to me looks like an NFL receiver. I think he could be a boundary X. I think he could be what you want him to be in the context of your offense.
A guy that I felt just watching him where I was like, okay, this is his floor was Zach Pascal, who I just feel like big-bodied kid, just really crafty. And I think him and Powell are very similar in that you get a varied release package. They can win off the ball in a lot of different ways. They're not burners. They're not dynamic with the ball in their hands, but they know how to separate every stage of the route. Really reliable at the catch point. They're good blockers. They can play on special teams. I just look at Fitzpatrick as an easy transition to the NFL. He's another guy who looked good down at the Senior Bowl as well. I like Fitzpatrick. And it's funny that I actually didn't know that you were going to go with the Devontae Adams comp, but I knew it was all right. It's who's an elite receiver. It's got some of these technical proficiencies. And it happened that Fitzpatrick is that guy.
Yeah, and just another guy that I thought really had an understanding of how to use pace and tempo, with his vertical stem. Knew how to run routes. Again, like you said, not explosive, but, because he's 6'2", he has stride length, he has some build-up speed. I just really liked his tape both years.
All right, well, let's go to our fourth receiver from the Senior Bowl. And all of these guys, the first 5 guys that we've done in this segment, have all been big body players, over 6'1.5", in that 200-pound range. This last guy is built differently. He's right around 5'9". He's under 190 pounds. He's got a short wingspan, a compact frame. But this guy's got legit speed as well. And he went down to the Senior Bowl and had a really good week down there.
Yeah.
That's D. Eskridge from Western Michigan, on the smaller school or the smaller side in terms of the school. What did you see from Eskridge, and why do you like his ability to make that jump to the league?
Well, I think we have to look at where the league's going. I think there's going to be more smaller, explosive receivers that teams scheme for. We see it with Tyreek Hill, okay? And he's not quite Tyreek Hill, but I think he can be deployed in much the same way that the Chiefs deployed Tyreek Hill. And there's a number of those receivers coming out in this draft. And Eskridge is, first of all, he didn't play receiver full-time until 2020, this year. Yeah. So he's an explosive athlete. He's got a solid frame. Now, again, he ran by corners, smaller level of competition, but he ran by corners. He's really good run after catch. He took a ton of slants, glance routes to the house in college. Again, you can't say that's going to happen in the NFL every week, but I think his skill set, his traits profile away really well in the NFL today. You can use him on jet sweeps, reverses, the wide receiver screen game. I just think this style of receiver now, size has become irrelevant for this style of receiver if used in that fashion. And I think you're going to see more and more of them in the NFL, and more of them mimic what Andy Reid and his staff have done with Tyreek Hill. And obviously Hill had some issues coming out of college off the field stuff, but even without that, no one saw Tyreek Hill as a top 50 pick.
Yeah. I think when you look at Eskridge too, you talk about not even just the speed and the suddenness, but he's got a knack for route running as well. He's a guy that knows how to set defenders up. He knows how to stick one way and break opposite, get defenders' hips flipped. He's a little bit older. He's going to be a 24-year-old rookie. He had an injury plague 2019. He was a fifth-year senior. So this is a guy, as you mentioned, only has started playing full-time at receiver this year. He was a two-way player. He played both wide receiver and corner each of the last couple of years. So I think when you look at Eskridge, you say, all right, he's going to be a full-time receiver now. And if we build off what we've seen with his skill set, this guy's got something that we can work with. And when you factor in his speed and explosiveness, the versatility is certainly there.
Yeah, and I think, it's easy when you look at guys to try to put them into a box and say, oh, he's a slot. Right. But I think more and more NFL offenses are becoming expansive in their thinking. And is he going to line up in the slot? Sure he is. But I think you have to go beyond just saying, 5-10 years ago, we would have said, oh, he's a slot. That's it. See you later. Yeah, but I think, you have to go beyond that.
Greg, when you watched him, one of my notes I wrote down is I felt he could beat the jam. I thought he showed the ability to defeat press coverage. So while he's not going to be an every down X receiver, if you need him to line up at X every once in a while, he can play through that initial jam and show that initial separation.
It's funny you say that, because one of my notes on his strengths was showed physicality versus press man coverage from boundary X, proactive. The tape showed you that. He was not a guy who was looking to run away from it. He played the game physically.
One of my notes was that he plays. He brings a defensive mentality to the receiver position that showed up both there defeating press and then also as a blocker, which, we can poo-poo in terms of how important that is, but just kind of giving you a picture into his mentality and his play personality. I thought that showed up time and time again.
I would agree with you. Another guy I just really, I'm fascinated to see who drafts him and how they choose to use him, because we said, I don't know if he's quite Tyreek Hill, but he's that kind of player.
Greg, we've talked about a lot of receivers already in this segment. We probably could do 2 more weeks just talking receivers, because there are that many guys in this class, but fun to break down 6 more here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We'll talk to you here next week.
Thanks, Fran.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
Well, excited to keep things rolling here with Draft Buzz as I welcome in my friend Ben Fennell. Ben, we're going to do another mock draft, and we did a 4-round mock draft last week. We did a 3-round mock the week before. This week, we're only going to do 2 rounds. We're taking it easy this week. We're going to go over to CBS Sports. Ryan Wilson doing a 2-round mock draft. Let's see some of these big picks are.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And this is a little bit of a different top 10 than the way things are trending. So kind of interesting to pull back some layers of this mock here.
All right. Well, with that being said, I'll let you kick things off. Most eye-popping pick in the first round of this mock draft. What was one that really stood out to you?
Well, I think it's kind of the distribution of quarterbacks. You go quarterback 1, 2, 3, which is as expected. And now figuring out if Atlanta and Cincinnati are going to field offers and trade out, or maybe even Atlanta take one. But the teams later in the top 10 selecting quarterbacks I thought were interesting. The Detroit Lions taking Justin Fields after obviously trading away Matt Stafford, going with Jared Goff, and immediately readdressing the quarterback position. 2 picks later, over the Carolina Panthers, who recently made a trade for the Jets' Sam Darnold this week. Does that mean they're out of the quarterback market? That allows the Panthers to take Jalen Waddle, really nice weapon for the offense. But it's the next pick that I think is interesting, and that's where QB number 5 falls, Trey Lance, to the Denver Broncos. Just 2 short years after taking Drew Lock in, I believe, the second round, and has still shown a lot of promise and upside. So this is the Lions and the Broncos going after that quarterback of the future while they have a viable starting quarterback under their belt, which has been a very popular trend we've seen, to not have to thrust the young quarterback into the lineup right away. So kind of 2 interesting landing spots.
Yeah, and just seeing how the quarterback carousel would play out in this mock draft after the trade of Sam Darnold from New York to Carolina would be interesting, because that obviously removes a team from the top 10 that was theoretically in the quarterback hunt. I can't imagine that Carolina is taking a quarterback at 8 overall now, after spending 3 picks on Sam Darnold, including a second rounder next year. So I think when you look at Denver, so this is a team that now you feel pretty good about their chances to end up with a quarterback. If you're looking at Detroit, does Detroit feel like, hey, if nobody moves up now to select a quarterback, before we were kind of thinking maybe this is best player available. Now, it becomes very real that a Justin Fields or a Trey Lance falls into our lap. So it makes it very interesting.
And really quick, Fran, if Trey Lance is available at the 8th overall pick and the Panthers are there at the 8th overall pick, I would be shocked if somebody didn't come up and trade for Trey Lance.
Yeah.
Because that is QB5. That is essentially that line in the sand of, going to that next tier of quarterbacks. So if I'm Washington, I'm pushing my chips to the table to get to 8. Maybe New England, maybe one of those other teams sitting there in the teens that aren't going to be able to get that quarterback. If Trey Lance is available with the 8th overall pick, somebody's going to go get him, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about even teams like Pittsburgh and New Orleans. Like, those teams are just they're being in the deep 20s. Like, it's tough to go from 25 to 8 or 25 to 6 or to 4 or to 5. So to me, you would need one of those guys to fall to 11, to fall to 13, to that is at least with kind of within striking distance. But that's why I feel like this trade from the Panthers this week to get Sam Darnold does make that a little bit more of a possibility, would be my guess. But that's
it's easier to trade to 8 than it is to into the top 5, and obviously everything then skids accordingly, after that. So I know teams trading for future picks and later picks on draft day is one of the best value deals to do out there, in the game of football. So if I'm looking at the Panthers and saying, hey, we got Darnold, we got some weapons, could we get a receiver 5-10 picks later that's comparable to a Jalen Waddle? I'm putting up billboards and saying, come get Trey Lance, guys.
And it is interesting just trying to look at the 11 teams picking ahead of the Eagles and say, okay, who are the teams that could, or that are very much going to take a quarterback, could take a quarterback, probably not going to take a quarterback. One of the teams that I would say probably not going to take a quarterback, the New York Giants. And that was the team that stood out to me with their selection, because I feel like we are so quick to just give them a pass rusher. Every once in a while, you'll see receiver thrown in there, one of the Alabama guys making it down that far. But most mock drafts, and rightfully so, the team needs help off the edge. But I think it's interesting looking now at this selection, and Ryan has them selecting linebacker Micah Parsons from Penn State. Now, there are a couple things here that make sense for me with this pick. Number one, the Giants defensive line coach comes from Penn State. They selected Cam Brown last year in the 6th round. He was a guy that he had worked with before. Micah Parsons, obviously, is a guy that he had worked with before too. So you get those, you connect the dots there with the familiarity aspect of it, right? But also, just keep in mind, when you look at, number one, Micah Parsons' skill set, he's got that all the versatility that you're looking for. That's the kind of front that they move players around and they ask them to do different things. And he, in theory, would fit that kind of a defensive scheme. But then also on top of that, when you have a GM that isn't afraid to buck the position value trends, right? I mean, Dave Gettleman, there was so much written about selecting Saquon Barkley at number 2, and then they've taken tight ends in the 1st round and things like that. This is Dave Gettleman's not worried about position value, and so if you look at saying, you never take a linebacker in round 1, especially if he's not a guy that can help in coverage, or is it going to wear the green dot if he's not that guy. I don't think Dave Gettleman is someone that would necessarily worry about that. So I think the Micah Parsons to New York angle, that I think that one makes sense. That was a pick that stood out to me from the 1st round.
Yeah, and I think that's addressing the pass rush need more than people think.
Yeah,
he's
sure.
not a guy that's going to go line up against Kyle Pitts outside the numbers in the red zone. This is a guy that's going to blitz. He's going to move forward and might even have his hand in the dirt on some third down sub packages, which is not a unconventional role. It's putting him into a position that he excels in. So I think you might be knocking out two birds with one stone with that pick.
No, it's a good point. So that was one that really, kind of fit in my mind. And let's go now to our next selection here, where we're going to say, okay, what's one in picks 16 through 32 at the back end of round one that really kind of fit, that connected a lot of dots for us. And I'll go first here. I'm going to go with another pass rusher, and that's Jason Ohay, also from Penn State, going to the Pittsburgh Steelers at number 25. And the reason why this makes sense to me, I think when you look back at what Pittsburgh has done over the last handful of years, first of all, they always draft defense. Remember, we had Matt Williamson on last month to talk about their trends. And, you look back at Kevin Colbert, it is defense. Round one, they go defense over and over and over and over again. So, go on that side of the ball, but they also draft for traits. They draft a lot of highly athletic players, some guys that might be viewed as projects, but guys that have those tools, in their body to be able to be athletic, dynamic playmakers at the first level, second level, third level of the defense. And Ohay certainly has that. It comes from that area of the country. That one made some sense to me. I think that was a good fit.
My pick here is what I call a wavelength pick, because we are on the same wavelength here, me and Ryan Wilson. I said earlier in the week, I think it's trending that we're not going to have any interior defensive linemen in round one. But if we do, it's going to be Levi Onwuzurike. And if we do, it's probably going to be to the Green Bay Packers at the end of round one, a spot that a lot of people have plugged Christian Barmore. But I like that Ryan Wilson has Onwuzurike going ahead of Barmore, who goes a couple picks later in the second round there. I think Onwuzurike is an exceptional player who didn't play in 2020, showed one day of practice down at the Senior Bowl, and is kind of the unforgotten man in this group at 6'3", 290, with a lot of athleticism, a lot of explosiveness, a lot of versatility, and he's really tough to peg. I've heard some scouts rumor he's a mid-first round talent, and I've heard some teams kind of lukewarm on him, and he could fall to, round 3. But I think it's trending that it's a lackluster interior defensive line group at the top, which you see here with only one trench player on the defensive side going in Onwuzurike. And I completely agree that I have him over Christian Barmore.
All right, so let's go now to round 2 of this mock draft, and we'll go through the pick that stood out most to us, the most eye-popping selection in round 2. I'll let you go first on this one.
Well, I really like a lot of the haul from the Jacksonville Jaguars this draft. We could talk about it a little bit later as I got Lawrence and some really fun offensive parts. But the pecking order of running back, the Jaguars go with Javonte Williams, running back, North Carolina, with the first pick in the second round, which is probably a very realistic ballpark.
Yeah.
But what isn't realistic, in my opinion, is seeing Javonte go over Najee Harris. Now, Travis Etienne went in the middle of round 1 to the Jets. He was the first running back off the board. Javonte over Najee Harris is not something you see quite often. And considering what Najee has done at Alabama, his ability to be successful in a variety of schemes, and is a very, very sneaky pass catcher and route runner that I think provides a little bit more third down upside over Javonte, who is probably going to be a stud pass protector. But Javonte Williams, 33rd overall, I love that ballpark, but I'm not sure I agree with the pecking order.
Interesting. And it's always fun looking at this from a not just a player team fit standpoint, but also just the order in which players are coming off the board, as you highlighted.
And I guess my disclaimer with that is that you can read into the pecking order, but you also have to look at the team needs and fits. So Javonte may be going to a team that doesn't value the scheme fit of a Harris or whatever other player we're talking about, right, which then changes the pecking order. He may not necessarily be a better prospect or a higher graded player collectively, but he's just a better fit. Therefore, he makes him a earlier prospect off the board.
So we talk a lot about the quarterbacks in the top 10 of this draft, the top 15 of this draft. When are they going to go off the board? What order do they go off the board? I'm also, I would say, almost like equally interested in that next tier of quarterbacks. Earlier this week, we talked about Davis Mills in the last episode, and you made that bold prediction. He could sneak into round 1, right? I look at Davis Mills, I look at Kyle Trask, I look at Kellen Mond in no order, and I say, when are those guys going to come off the board? How early, how soon is too soon? How early will teams feel comfortable? Because I think all three of those guys show traits that you would say, yeah, like I could see a path to him being a starter in the NFL. So at what point do the teams that missed out on those top 5 quarterbacks in this draft then pull the trigger on one of those three? And we get my answer here at 55 overall. I go back to the Pittsburgh Steelers and they select Kellen Mond. And I think when, again, looking at Kellen Mond and the way that he plays, what he put on film, I thought he made a big jump from 2019 to 2020. And it's interesting because I think when you talk to people that have evaluated his tape in the league, in the media, a lot of people say, yeah, I saw that same jump. And then you talk to other people who are smart people and say like, yeah, I didn't really see him improve over the course of his career. I thought he's the same guy in 2018 that we saw here in 2020. So there's differing opinions on Kellen Mond. I happen to think that he made a nice jump. I thought you saw really good accuracy from a consistent standpoint with him. Really a guy that really needs to play within structure. And I thought that he played well within that structure this year. Him in that passing game with Pittsburgh, with the threats that they have and the way that they want to play offense, that makes some sense. I think that it would be an interesting pick, especially with Big Ben still there to kind of teach him the ropes a little bit as they try and groom him as a potential replacement down the road.
I think that's a great fit and visually a great fit because the guy that I've been kind of comparing to Mond was Josh Dobbs, who the Steelers took in the 4th round a couple years earlier with a similar type of career trajectory, being a 4-year starter, has some mobility, but is really a pocket passer, technically sound. These are the types of guys you take in the middle rounds and you take chances on. So I actually love that fit. And that's right in the ballpark. Davis Mills went 3 picks earlier to the Bears at 52. So I think 52, Davis Mills, 55, Kellen Mond. I'm drawing the line at 60. I think both those guys are going to go in the top 60 early round 2. Maybe Mills is coveted by somebody at the back end of round 1, like I predicted at the end of Journey last week. But yeah, I think round 2, definitely Kellen Mond, Davis Mills. They're not getting past there.
All right, let's now transition to our best fits in round 2. And I'll go first here. I really liked at 45 overall, the Jacksonville Jaguars selecting Rondale Moore, the wide receiver from Purdue. And not only do I see him as a good fit in Urban Meyer's offense, it's kind of like that Curtis Samuel kind of slot back, Percy Harvin playing that role. I think he fits that to a T, right? And pairing him with Laviska Shenault, who does some of those same things in a different package, right? I mean, he's more of the big physical player as opposed to Moore, who he's got some physicality to him, but he's known more for his dynamic qualities and his yards after catch from that standpoint. But I think it's a great fit. And then also, who better to say like, hey, like I know what this guy can be than Urban Meyer? How often do we refer back to Rondale Moore and 2018, his freshman year, as he nearly beat Ohio State single-handedly there under the lights? Urban Meyer's on the opposing sideline and got to see Rondale Moore up close. So I'm sure that's an experience he kind of draws. I
forgot about that.
I love that fit. I thought that made a lot of sense to me.
You know, those types of performances leave lasting impressions.
They stick, without question.
And there were a couple of those plays right on the Ohio State sideline that I'm sure kept Urban up at night. But to see that 4-player haul in the top 45 picks for the Jags, to go Trevor Lawrence, Trayvon Moehrig, Javonte Williams, Rondale Moore.
Pretty good.
I mean, that's 4 players that are very likely to be in the top 30 of a lot of big boards.
That's a good group.
So I think there's some really good positional value. But a couple of my favorites, I love the fits of these players to the Indianapolis Colts. They're not going to be fits for everybody, but Peyton Turner, University of Houston, a guy we've compared to like a Danico Autry, who they would love to replace. Greg Newsome out of Northwestern, kind of a zone style corner. I think it's a great fit for Indy. But one of my favorite picks in the draft, and you got to slide way down in round 2 to the Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers, adding Michael Carter, which I think would be a great complement to a Leonard Fournette, you know, a third down back that you could still get some juice in the run game, the screen game, someone that's a little bit more natural catching the football. They've tried to work on Keyshawn Vaughn quite a bit last year, rookie out of Vanderbilt. I think Michael Carter is an upgrade right away. And if you could get him at 64, I think that's some really good value. That end of round 2, a lot of good value from Richie Grant, you know, Terrace Marshall, Elijah Moore, Michael Carter. And like I've said before, Fran, the middle rounds, round 2 is when this draft starts.
No question. It's always the meat of that draft. No question is when you get into that area. Let's go now into the Eagles selections here. 2-round mock drafts. We've got 2 players. Round 1, The Eagles go at 12 overall, Northwestern offensive lineman Raeshawn Slater. And let's just go into the blurb here from Ryan. Again, this is Ryan's words here. Devontae Smith makes sense, but with the wide receiver class being deeper than the offensive line group, the Eagles go with Slater, who could step into a starting role either at tackle or inside on day one. Raeshawn Slater, Ben, this is now we'll put that to bed. Raeshawn is a really interesting player that when you look at his numbers from his pro day, we'll get into the film a little bit too. His workout, very undersold. It was a historically good workout with what he did from an athleticism standpoint. I know the arms, the arm length people have questions about and all that. And there's questions about, is he a tackle? Is he a guard? But this is a really tough player, experienced player, started every game that he played in the Big Ten. He checks a lot of boxes, and with that versatility, perceived versatility, he's never played guard before. So that is a question. But a lot of people feel he can make that jump. It's an interesting selection there at 12 overall.
Well, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Fran.
Okay.
Looking at our current offensive line situation, let's say everybody is 110% healthy into camp, into the preseason. You add a Raeshawn Slater. Does Raeshawn Slater earn a starting job heading into 2021? And just for a quick perspective, the current starting five would be Andre Dillard, Isaac Seumalo, Jason Kelsey, Brandon Brooks, Lane Johnson. So it's really going to take a little bit of stress and thought to say, compete with Dillard for left tackle, compete with Isaac for left guard. Is he just reliable depth at a position we've seen tested year in and year out, that we just know he's going to get called up off the bench? And the sixth man award is almost warranted in the NFL, considering how much depth is relied upon and needed. But I just want to know your thoughts. Where do you think he would fit?
Well, I think that, when you look at what Nick Sirianni has said since he's arrived, and he's talked about competition. So, whether he's competing at guard, whether he's competing at tackle, he would give you that ability to kind of come in and, do that, whether it's with Seumalo inside at guard, whether it's with the guys at tackle, if it's Andre Dillard or if it's Jordan Mailata, he's going to have that competition there. And I think they'll just kind of let the best man win right at this point and see how things shake out for 2021.
I think the conversation would get roped into so much of like what I just said. Where is he going to play? Who is he competing with? For a team that started, 14 different offensive line combinations last year? That should be just a very safe thought to say, who cares where he plays? Who cares who he competes with? This is making the room better. This is going to make the group better, the offense better. And it's just putting more coals into that furnace where it's, it's not the sexy spot, but we've seen before, if you don't have that O-line, it can doom everything. So I just love to say, you know what? Don't worry about where he plays. Let's just add good players to the team.
Not to mention too, man, I've been thinking about this a lot over the last year or two. Everyone, will say like, oh, you got to go best player available in the draft. Always take best player available. You always take best player available. People say that until a team selects the best player available and it's not at a position of need, then everybody's up in arms. Everybody's, got the pitchforks out and then got the torches lit when the team doesn't, takes a player at a position that you didn't have highlighted as a position of need on draft day. It happens time and time again. You look around the NFL and you say like, oh, well, this wasn't an area of need. And then all of a sudden the summer hits and it's like, oh man, we need a tackle. We need a wide receiver. We need a corner. We had an injury here. This young player didn't develop. And now all of a sudden we need somebody. But it's just funny how that always tends to happen is when a team selects somebody that wasn't an area of need. It's like, oh, what were they thinking? They don't need this player. But then the same analyst will say like, oh, well, you got to do the best player.
It sparks the divisive conversation because, it just, if they have a hole, you're just wondering why would you omit, addressing that, and just creates a little bit more of a question, I guess. Yep. About the picks, but you just have to a little bit of patience and wait till you get into the season, and it should all work out.
All right, so let's get to round two. Jamin Davis, the linebacker from Kentucky, who's gotten a lot of buzz lately, Ben. This guy is an athletic freak, only a one-year starter. Was named a starter late in the preseason process down there for the Wildcats at UK. But he's got talent, no question. Sideline to sideline range, playmaker in the pass game. He can get after it as a blitzer. Showed some ability to defend the run as well. He's got great length. Tools are all there, and there's just been a lot of buzz on Jamin Davis from Kentucky.
Yeah, he's really been on a meteoric rise with his essentially 1 year starting, but he's been a special teams demon most of his career as well. So a guy that I think has that high floor ability, can contribute in the pass game with some eye-popping interceptions this past year, particularly that one against Tennessee, flipping his hips and making a play in the seam. And then I think he ran it back for a touchdown. So a guy with a really high side athleticism that seems like a Davion Taylor with a little bit more readiness to his game. As we know, Davion was a late start to football and had some kind of unique developmental aspects to his career. But Jamin Davis in his pro day, his rise, as you can see my hand just going right up the graph, from his 2020 season into his pro day. And I'm sure as he starts talking to teams with interviews, it's going to keep rising. He might end up being the back end of round one type of linebacker.
That seems like, again, you're looking at it from and this is the way people look at it too. It's like, oh, well, he's only rising because of the pro day. No, it's not necessarily he's rising because of the pro day. He's rising because people are getting more eyes on him, right? This is a unique season, a unique process. The SEC doesn't start playing till mid-October. It's his first year starting. No one was talking about him in September. Now people are talking about him in Buzz's building. That's how this kind of works for a player like that. But an interesting player, nonetheless, very, very high upside that we talked about a little bit here on the show, but I feel like we've been talking about him a lot more lately. So that was our take on a handful of picks from Ryan Wilson's mock draft, and you can go find that on CBS Sports. Ben, as always, this has been a lot of fun. We'll be back early next week. We're talking through the top corners in the draft, and it'll be fun talking about a really talented group of guys. Well, me, you, Dane. By the way, Dane's Beast is out over on The Athletic. You can go check that out as well. As it's one of the best resources you can get, regardless of what team you root for. Outstanding information in the Beast over at The Athletic. So, Ben, we'll talk to you later next week.
The unofficial visit.
Well, excited to welcome in here to the unofficial visit, UCLA defensive lineman Osa Odighizuwa. Osa, thanks for joining me, man.
Thank you for having me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I'm excited to talk with you. And you are a player that I've watched now for the last couple of years out there at UCLA over on the West Coast, and one of my favorite defensive linemen in this draft. But before we get into you on the field, I just want to ask you, it's late in the pre-draft process. The pro day has come and gone. With that being said, what was the training process like for you leading up to that, after the Senior Bowl? And then what's it been like since? How have things changed since the pro day has ended?
So just the whole time was trying to get my body right, feeling as good as possible, loose, in good shape without hurting myself. That's their whole concept at Exos, where I was training at before pro day, is to sharpen you without hurting you. You know what I mean? So getting my body as healthy as I could possibly be, and just, in as tip-top shape to go do my 40 short shuttle, 3-cone, all that stuff. Now getting back into more football stuff. So didn't run the 40 because I was struggling with a hamstring, still kind of rehabbing that as well. So just been doing cardio that doesn't involve too much running. So I've been boxing and then just lifting weights.
So I've watched you. I watched every single snap of yours this year. I watched all your snaps at the Senior Bowl. I watched a bunch of games from you from a year ago in 2019. So I've watched a lot of film. But for our listeners who have not watched you play, give us a scouting report in terms of what you bring to the table and what you'll bring to your future NFL team.
An explosive guy. I can get off the ball very quickly. I'd say I have probably one of the best get-offs in this draft class. I play with probably one of the best, if not the best, pad levels, and I can get into a guy, get my hands on a guy's chest quick in the run game. Don't lose a lot of battles that way, just off of the quickness of my get off and the ability to get into a guy very quickly with good pad level and driving back. Good agility and quickness that are going to be able to use to get vertically on slants and things like that when I'm called to slant inside or slant outside. So just a good blend of quickness and strength that I'd say I play with overall that keeps guys on their toes and I could use to my advantage.
One thing that I was really interested to talk to you about is, and your coaching staff out in UCLA, and namely your defensive coordinator, obviously your head coach, they were here in Philadelphia a few years ago. And so just having an idea of what they look for in the defensive line, and even watching them when they were at Oregon and seeing the kind of defensive lineman they brought in, you are much different than that template, right? In terms of how you're built and your body type. Was that something, obviously you were there when they arrived. Was that something that they talked about? And just talk about what was that whole dynamic like for you as you're trying to find ways to carve your role in that system?
I knew I didn't fit exactly what they typically are looking for in guys like that are bigger and longer. I mean, I fit the longer part, but
sure.
As far as like being taller, bigger guy, that's not me, you know what I mean? But I know what I bring to the table as far as my athleticism, and I'm a lot stronger than people would think, So I just knew I had to bet on myself and just keep working and approach it how I usually do, you know what I mean? Just with a positive attitude, hard work ethic, never giving up, So I see a challenge and I'm going to take it head on and just give it my all.
You talked about your quickness, your explosiveness off the ball. Is there an individual play from over the course of your career that, if I have never seen you play, or if a scout or a coach, the first play you want them to see when they turn the film on, is there one that kind of stands out, whether it was this past year in 2020 or even throughout the course of your career?
I can't think of one off the top of my head, to be honest. I feel like my get off is pretty standard throughout every play of the game. So if you wanted to see that, you could look at any play. I'd say especially when people try pulling a guard in front of me when I backdoor it, that's due to my get off being very fast, obviously knowing when it's coming as well, and just my football IQ. But I feel like if you look at my tape, it's going to speak for itself.
It was something we got to see with you down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. What was that process like for you? And the second part of that would be, who was the best player that you went up against? If you had to pick one guy, I was like, man, like this guy gave it every single day, whether it was on defense or offense. Who was the guy that stood out to you most, and what was that process like?
I would say it was definitely Quinn Miners. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He was a good dude from Whitewater. Nobody knew who he was. I just knew at weigh-ins, I saw him. I was like, okay, this guy looks pretty cut for an O-lineman. Guy with dreads. I'm like, I wonder who he is. So then after going against him a couple of days in a row, I'm like, okay, this is a guy that I'm gonna have to bring my stuff against. You know what I mean? Just be on it when I go against this guy. So we had a good back and forth there. And then Creed Humphreys, I had a good back and forth with him as well. So, but I love it. When I see someone that's able to challenge me in such a way, I know that's iron sharpening iron. And I know that's someone that's going to get me better. So I approach that with a positive mindset. And I know, like, I'm not going to back down. These are people that give me a challenge and like pose a threat to me. So,
yeah,
I love it.
I was going to ask you, when you're preparing for the Senior Bowl, give us a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. Are you more focused on just preparing your own game? Did you kind of look around and say, all right, here are the offensive linemen I'm probably going to be matched up against, try and watch some film of those guys to get you ready for the week? What was your mindset going into the week down in Mobile?
It was nameless, faceless guys until I got there. You know what I mean? So I didn't look at anyone's tape beforehand. I kind of got an idea of who I was going to be going against, when I see the invites and stuff like that. Just look up like a clip or two just to see what they're talking about, just to see what their play style is or something like that. But really didn't look at too much film on anyone else besides myself, and just figuring out what I needed to get better at as far as like my eye discipline and taking double teams. They were short on interior defensive linemen, so I ended up playing nose most of the week. But, my mentality is if you can play nose, you can play anywhere. You know what I mean? So meeting double teams all day. If they're asking me to do that, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. So, if I can do that in the run game, then I'll be able to play the run game anywhere on the line. So, and the fundamentals are all the same. So I was just making sure I was getting my game as perfectly as sharp as possible and as polished as possible for the Senior Bowl.
What's your favorite pass rush move?
I like to hit a swipe.
Yeah. How long have you kind of been honing in on that, and how long has that been your favorite move?
It's been my favorite move since like my freshman year. I didn't really have too many pass rush moves in high school. So when I came to UCLA, started working on them, and I felt like the swipe was the most natural one. I'll say the long arm lift and just like bull rushing obviously helps me set that up. So I hit the bull rush a lot just so people can respect my power, because, offensive linemen are crafty nowadays, hit you with feint hands, it's trying to get you to shoot a move early. So I like to just hit guys with a nice bull rush to give them make them respect my power, because they're not going to feint you. They're not going to give you a fake punch if you're coming straight down the middle of the chest or just running through their face.
Yeah,
so
that's what I was going to say. If you're mixing things up as they're trying to mix up their pass set with their hands, I mean, that makes it a little bit harder to be able to try and get your timing down. And I guess with your first step, if you're able to clear the lineman's hands, I mean, you've got the upfield shoulder and you feel like you've won.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the big parts of your game. What would you say is your favorite part of playing football, of just the entire experience, whether going back to high school, college, and obviously now preparing for the league?
I mean, I feel like it's just that if you're really on it, you know what I mean, and you're just having a great performance, you feel like you're dominating, you know what I mean, just feeling like you're imposing your will on another guy. Also winning with your boys, you know what I mean, the guys that you practice with day in and day out. So if you're dominating, you know what I mean, like, and then it feeds to another guy and he starts dominating too, and like it just gets contagious, and then next thing you know, you're just having a dominant game. So I feel like when you're on the field, everyone's on their A game, and it just is a great time, great energy. Everyone's doing well and everyone's feeding off each other. That's probably one of the best times. I'd say Oregon game, even though we didn't get the win, I feel like it was probably one of the most fun games to play this year because we had great energy, and we have great energy every time, but like a lot of plays were being made on defense. So just to be a part of that and just bring energy and just feeding off guys and having guys give you life, even on the other side of the ball, I feel like that's probably my favorite part.
So I want to ask you about that UCLA team and the guys that are going back next year for 2021. Being on the East Coast, I don't think a lot of people here, a lot of fans out this way, don't necessarily see too much of UCLA, especially you guys, a team on the rise. Who's a player or two that really stands out to you in terms of they're ready to kind of make that next jump, that a year from now they'll be sitting where you're sitting, getting ready for the NFL, being talked about being a pretty early draft pick here in the 2022 draft?
I mean, I feel like there's a lot of guys on that defense that are going to be able to turn heads. You know what I mean? Like guys that are polished, they have experience. So now they're just getting even further sharpened their game. So by the time next year comes around, they're going to be dominant most of the time that they're on the field. I'd say Q Knight is one of those guys. Q Lake, definitely. Jay Shaw, Mitch Agude. There's a Daytona Jackson. There's a few guys, you know what I mean? I feel like we have a very good returning class on defense and on offense too. Kyle Phillips and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, those guys are going to be able to get after it. Sean Ryan's a great offensive lineman, really good. Alec Anderson, there's a bunch of guys on the team that are experienced and they know what it takes to be successful on the field. So now having that and being able to have another offseason, and COVID kind of messed up last year's offseason. So being able to be with the team for the whole offseason this year is something that's going to be crucial, I feel like, and will definitely pay off for guys moving forward.
The first name you brought up there, Q, what is it that stands out about him in terms of his ability to make that jump? At what point did you realize this is a guy that can make that jump for us?
I mean, I realized early on, like as soon as we started practicing, guy Q is coming down. He's in the box a lot because we blitz a lot. So he's coming with everything that he has. You know what I mean? He's a guy that brings great energy and it's easier for guys to feed off of, and he makes the practice environment more fun, makes the game environment more fun, and he's a dog. You know what I mean? So that's something that I could look at and I could respect a lot because I'm trying to do the same exact thing. So when you have someone that's on the same page as you are and they just transferred in, you know what I mean? So he's a guy he's in the same position as me. So he's an older guy. He's played before. He's had the experience. So just knowing what he needed to do and being able to play that role coming in made me respect him a lot.
A couple Pac-12 offensive linemen figure to be the first drafted at their position here when we get to later this month. Give us a little bit of a scouting report. Obviously, you didn't match up too often with Elijah Vera Tucker or with Penn Sewell where they played, but interested to kind of get your thoughts. How do you view them making that jump to the league?
I feel like they'll be able to do pretty well at the league. A lot of people sleep on Pac-12 guys, but, feel like for guys their size, they have pretty good feet and hands. So I feel like it'll be an easy transition.
And then who was the toughest guy you felt you went up against in a game this past year where you're like, man, like this guy gave me everything he had every single snap? Is there a guy that stands out, one individual?
I'm not gonna lie. I say I'm pretty slow to give guys credit. I'm more so, was he that good, or is there something that I can do to make a better outcome? And honestly, the answer is yes. I can always do something to change the outcome of what I thought might not have been the best performance. So it's more of a me versus me kind of thing.
Interesting. All right. Well, so it's good self-awareness on your part. Well, Osa, this has been great, man. Thanks so much for taking a few minutes out of your time. Keep getting ready for the draft. Excited to see where you end up later this month, man. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the draft mailbag.
Hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Osa Odighizuwa. I'm interested to see where he ends up here in this NFL draft. We'll hopefully catch up with another player or two. We like to catch up with players and share those interviews here on the podcast. We usually do a little bit more than we've done this year. Obviously, being at the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl and the Combine, we're able to get a little bit better access. This year, it's been kind of whenever I can get them, if I talk to somebody that can hook me up with the player, we'll get them here on the show. But next year, we'll try and get a lot more guys in the lead up to the 2022 NFL draft. Let's get to your questions here. And again, the best way to reach us is to go on Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a comment, go into the comment section, leave us a question, and we will answer it right here in this segment. First one, Silk CNNs left a 5-star review saying, "Hey, Fran, big fan of the show. Both Journey to the Draft and Eagle Eye in the Sky have been my favorite sports shows to listen to over the last year. Now that the top quarterback prospects have had their pro days, I'm curious to hear some of your thoughts about them. Who exceeded expectations? Which quarterback had a lackluster pro day? Could you give a mini power ranking with some highs and lows of Wilson and Lance and Jones and Fields pro days, and discuss how their draft stock may have been affected after their pro days? Thanks, and keep up the great work, Trevor." So, Trevor, it's a good question, and I'm going to take a slightly different approach to answering it, because here's how I feel about pro days. They are obviously very important, because if they weren't important, teams would not be going to them. You would not see head coaches, general managers, college directors, position coaches, coordinators. Coaches have better things to do right now than to be going out to random college campuses in all corners of the country. They could be doing that. Trust me, they would rather be doing many other things than that. So they wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't important. That being said, especially for a quarterback pro day, for me to be sitting at home and saying that, wow, that was really, really impressive, it's tough for me to do that. And let me tell you why. I think that a lot of the value that you get from a pro day, from a quarterback standpoint, is being able to see the guy throw live. And that's one of the things I love about being able to go to the Combine and being able to go to the Senior Bowl, to the Shrine Bowl. Being able to see those quarterbacks throw live, it's a little bit different of an experience. And you'll hear every coach and every scout say that. For quarterbacks especially, seeing them throw live is a lot different than seeing him throw on tape. And, you could say all you want about like hearing it come out of his hand and things like that. Just being able to be there and just see how the ball pops out of his hand is a little bit different. Now, watching it on TV, watching it on film, yeah, you can see how the ball comes out. You can see how that throw that Zach Wilson made was a ridiculous throw. I mean, he's rolling to his left. He throws it like 65 plus yards to the right. Ridiculous. It's a ridiculous throw. And there have been great pro days over the years from a lot of quarterbacks. But for me personally, I'm not going to sit here and say I want to rank how all these guys did. The other part of it that I will say is that the reason why stock rises and falls with quarterbacks at pro days is when team sources, again, coaches, scouts, GMs, they get on campus, they start talking with people, their sources that are there on the campus, coaching staff, support staff, things like that, guys that they know from the past. They might catch up and say, and it's just another exposure to somebody that's been around this player. And that's where you start to get a little bit more background info, a little bit more assurance. Yeah, this guy's the real deal. He's everything that you would want. You could say, and again, it's all part of the puzzle. But I think that's, to me, like, I never will go crazy about how a guy performs in a pro day when I'm not there to see it. And I think that, obviously the testing numbers are important. We talked earlier this week about how, everyone's talking about all the pro day numbers are inflated, this, that, and the other. Yeah, maybe that's true for the 40s. And obviously teams account for that with how they record those 40-yard dashes, if it's on a different surface or if it's outside versus inside, and trying to correlate that back to the surface at Lucas Oil Stadium for the Combine every year. But you can't fudge the vertex for the vertical jump, right? You're not going to fudge the 3-cone drill or the short shuttle. Those times are those times, and those are being recorded by NFL scouts. So to me, I still, you look at the pro day workout, very, very important. The positional work, very, very important. But it's going to be extra important. It's most important for the people that are in attendance. And that's why it is interesting to keep note of who are the people that are there. Who are the assistant coaches that are running a player's positional workout? Who are the coordinators that are in attendance? Who are the head coaches that are in attendance? Because those are the people that are taking the most out of it. And I think that that's always interesting to follow. So, Slick, I know it's a little bit of a different way to answer the question. I hope you are happy and satisfied with the answer. Sorry, I wouldn't give you like a kind of a power rankings. I just don't feel like that's the way I look at it in terms of trying to rank and assume how these guys helped their stock or hurt their stock with their pro day. All guys should look good in their positional work. They all should, because they're preparing for it for months and months and months. They're doing what they are trained to do, right? And that's get ready to play football. And that's what these drills are all geared towards. So good question there. And I'm glad you brought it up because it's a really important topic this time of year. Let's go to one final one here. T Fuller 09 left a 5-star review saying, hey, great show as always. This is a show I stay locked onto, especially around this time of year. A little bit of a different mock draft this time. Doing the top 15 picks. This is a bit of a wishful thinking as an Eagles fan, but what is the realistic possibility of this happening? So basically what they did is they did the top 15 picks and said like, all right, what are the chances that this is going to happen? So I'll buzz through them real quick, and then we'll kind of address a couple things. Number 1, Jacksonville taking Trevor Lawrence, quarterback out of Clemson. The New York Jets at number 2, taking Zach Wilson, quarterback BYU. San Francisco at number 3, taking Trey Lance out of North Dakota State, the quarterback. Atlanta taking quarterback Justin Fields. So you got QB 1, 2, 3, 4. Cincinnati taking Penn Sewell, the offensive tackle from Oregon. Miami taking Penn State linebacker Micah Parsons at 6. Go to number 7 overall, the Detroit Lions taking wide receiver Devontae Smith from Alabama. Carolina Panthers taking Kyle Pitts, the tight end from Florida. Number 9, Denver taking Mac Jones, the quarterback from Alabama. Number 10, Dallas Cowboys taking Caleb Farley, the corner from Virginia Tech. New York Giants at 11 taking Michigan pass rusher Kwity Paye. Number 12, the Eagles taking wide receiver Jamar Chase from LSU. Chargers taking Jalen Waddle, the wide receiver from Alabama at 13. 14, you've got Jason Ohay, the pass rusher from Penn State. And 15, you've got Patriots taking Patrick Surtain, the second from Alabama. So those are the top 15. Let's just kind of buzz through some points of inflection here. I think the first couple picks, you go chalk, right? Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson makes sense. We can move past that. Number 3, San Francisco taking a quarterback. Now, whether that's Trey Lance, whether that's Justin Fields, whether that's Mac Jones, you assume that they're going to go quarterback here. They're going quarterback. So whichever one they go with, that makes sense to me. Atlanta taking quarterback. It seems that that's the struggle going on right now, right? ESPN's Chris Mortensen put out earlier this week that there's kind of, the debate in the building is, do they go with a quarterback, which the report says that that's the way the coaching staff feels, that, hey, we don't need to go quarterback right now. Let's go with Kyle Pitts. While the new general manager, Terry Fontenot, wants to go quarterback and say, hey, we're picking the top 5. Let's get our guy now and then give us the security for the future. My guess, if they stay put, we'll see if they go quarterback. It's certainly on the table. And I think that, you take Justin Fields there. That makes sense. So, yeah, definitely a plausible scenario. Cincinnati, this is where it gets really interesting for me, right? Because you look at the Bengals, and I feel like, leading up to this point, everybody would say, yep, Penn Sewell. Even if sometimes you might say Raeshawn Slater. All right, we're going to give them an offensive tackle to protect Joe Burrow's blind side. But there's been so much buzz lately about them taking a pass catcher to help Joe Burrow, whether it's Kyle Pitts in the middle of the field, give him that presence that he had a year ago or 2 years ago now with Justin Jefferson in the slot, or reunite him with his buddy Jamar Chase out of LSU. So I could see them going that direction instead of offensive tackle. And I would say, because going back to your question, doing this with wishful thinking as an Eagles fan, obviously T. Fuller is hoping that Jamar Chase falls to number 12. I think Jamar Chase definitely in play for the Cincinnati Bengals. So that would be the first point. If you're hoping that Jamar Chase falls, you need if you're hoping that Jamar Chase falls, you're hoping that Cincinnati passes on him. And certainly Penn Sewell is in the running there, but that's just a big one that you need to be familiar with. Keep in mind that that's certainly on the table there. Number 6, Micah Parsons going to Miami. This one would surprise me a little bit. I think when you look at the Miami Dolphins, they parted ways with Kyle Van Noy this offseason, and that's because they felt pretty good about some of the young players that they already have on the roster. My guess is when you look at Miami, they're looking at one of these pass catchers. And whether it's Kyle Pitts who falls to them, or whether it's Jalen Waddle, or potentially Jamar Chase as well. This certainly is a spot where Jamar Chase could go at number 6. I do feel that they would go with one of these pass catchers. So we'll see ultimately how that goes. Number 7, you got the Detroit Lions going Devontae Smith. I could definitely see that. As I mentioned in the last segment or a couple segments ago, I think that Detroit could go quarterback here. So maybe this is where Mac Jones ends up. Maybe they go with a Micah Parsons. I could see Parsons going as high as Detroit. I feel like that's probably his ceiling right in this draft, is that he could go that high. Number 8, Carolina, out of the quarterback market now. They go Kyle Pitts. Yeah, I could absolutely see Matt Rule and company going with Kyle Pitts. That would make a lot of sense to me, trying to pair him with Sam Darnold and give him a weapon in the middle of the field. So Kyle Pitts, number 8, makes sense. Denver taking Mac Jones makes sense. Number 10, Dallas Cowboys taking Caleb Farley, first corner off the board with the back surgeries and everything. Here's what I'll say. He fits Dan Quinn's scheme. Dallas has shown in the past they're not afraid of guys with medical red flags. Remember, they took Jalen Smith coming off that devastating knee injury late in his career, right? And he couldn't play his first year. They've taken some medical red flags in the past. If you look back, day 1, day 2, they've taken guys with some, they took Leighton Vander Esch as well at linebacker. And he had, despite the fact that he had the history of the shoulder and neck issues. So Caleb Farley, I would say that that's a potential pick there for the Dallas Cowboys. That's not completely out of the question. Could he pay? Makes some sense to the New York Giants. I think that definitely is a pick that Dave Gettleman could make. So I wouldn't rule that one out either. And so now that gets to your point about Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle both being on the board there, and Patrick Surtain all being on the board there for the Eagles at 12. And so, look, am I saying that all 3 of those guys are going to be available? No, I talked to you about it. Jamar Chase could go as early as number 5. You could plug in Jalen Waddle as early as number 6 to Miami. There are situations where those guys don't fall, but you outlined a scenario where that could happen. And we don't know how these cards are going to fall until we get to draft night. That's what makes it so fun, because you have all these different possibilities. Really, until you get outside of that top 5, even the top 10, you don't know how this is all going to fall, because all these teams are going to have different value systems. And that's why we do the blueprint segment every single week, right? Is that, trying to get inside the minds of these decision makers. It's so much fun. It's one of my favorite parts of this entire process. So T. Fuller, great question. And also a great question there to start things off from Silk CNNs as well. Thanks so much for your support here on the podcast. It's been a fun week of content here on the Journey to the Draft. We'll be back next week. We're going to keep going. We're going to be a couple weeks away now from draft weekend. Hope you guys are ready. Thanks for joining us once again on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
In just over 3 years, Eagles Autism Foundation has raised millions of dollars for autism research and care. But this is about so much more than just fundraising. This is about making a transformational difference in the lives of those affected by autism. This is about bringing our community together. With inclusive, sensory-friendly events and accessible resources, we meet families where they need us most and where we can serve them best. Together, we're united in our mission to improve the lives of the autism community and to turn awareness into action. It's what we focus on every day in every way.